Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a very high-profile missing persons case that took place in Toronto, Canada, and that is the disappearance of Nicole Morin, who was an 8-year-old girl who vanished from her apartment in the 1980s and to this day is still missing, and the disappearance is still unsolved. The investigation for Nicole was actually the biggest missing persons investigation ever launched by the Toronto police. And what's so crazy about this case is despite this large-scale investigation, there was never any physical evidence found to help solve the disappearance. However, the details of the day that she went missing and how everything happened they're truly eerie. And there are so many theories about what happened to her. I feel like anybody who lives in Canada or has lived in Canada has heard about this case. Like, it was big news at the time. And in fact, it was in the news again just this past summer, which is what inspired me to make this video. But we'll get into that. First, let's go into a little bit of background on Nicole. So Nicole Louise Morin was born on April 1st, 1977. Her parents are named Art and Jeanette Morin, and Nicole was their only child. They had been married for 12 years before Nicole's birth, but at the time of her disappearance, Art and Jeanette were actually separated. Nicole was living with her mother in an apartment. The address is 627 The West Mall in Etobicoke, which is still technically Toronto, but it's a little bit west of Toronto, while her father was living in Mississauga, which is in the Greater Toronto area. Art worked as a truck driver and Jeanette ran an at-home daycare out of the Etobicoke apartment. I read a quote from Nicole's father that said, "She was very energetic and kind and not selfish at all. She was taking swimming lessons and dancing lessons, ballet and jazz, and liked to go to McDonald's to have some fun. She loved Ontario Place. She was just a normal, beautiful little child." Which is just so sad. I know it was so heartbreaking for her parents, for any parents when their child goes missing, obviously. But it's just so sad to think that she had so much left of her life to live when all of this happened. Okay, so now let's talk about what happened on the day that Nicole went missing. On July 30th, 1985, Nicole was 8 years old and school was out for the summer. It was reportedly a really hot summer day and she had made plans to go swimming with her friend in the West Mall apartment pool where she lived with her mother. It was an outdoor pool and she was supposed to meet her friend down in the lobby at 11 a.m. Around 10:30 a.m., Nicole went down to the lobby to just check the mail and then went back up to her penthouse unit where she changed into her swimsuit and got ready for her swimming date with her friend. Before leaving the apartment, Nicole's friend, her name was Jen, buzzed up to Nicole's unit using the apartment intercom system, letting her know that she was down in the lobby, and Nicole told her that she would be down in a couple of minutes. Nicole said goodbye to her mother and left the apartment, and that was actually the last time that Jeanette would see her daughter. She left wearing a peach-colored one-piece bathing suit, a green hairband, and red canvas shoes. She carried a plastic bag and a peach-colored blanket. And then about 15 minutes later after Nicole left, Jen buzzed up to the apartment again and Jeanette answered the call, and Jen was wondering why Nicole hadn't come downstairs yet. Jeanette wasn't concerned and just assumed that the elevators were taking a long time, or maybe they had missed each other. Like, she thought that maybe Nicole had gone to the pool, and that's what she told Jen, was to go and check the pool. Maybe Nicole was already there. I know in hindsight this seems a little bit weird, but you have to remember that this was the 80s and it was totally normal for kids to be fully independent and just wander the streets, and parents would just expect them to be home for dinner. And also Jeanette was running that at-home daycare from her apartment, so it's not like she could leave those kids unattended to go help Jen find Nicole downstairs. Jen would later recount that she went to the pool and looked for Nicole, waited in the lobby for a little bit longer, and then just decided to go home because she couldn't just stand there waiting all day. And then it wasn't until hours later that Jeanette realized Nicole was missing when she didn't return home for dinner. And then she ended up calling Jen and found out that the two had never managed to meet up. I couldn't find exactly when Jeanette had called the police to report Nicole missing, but many sources said that it was hours later. Okay, so now let's get into the investigation into the disappearance. When the police were notified, they took it very seriously right away. They immediately set up roadblocks all around the apartment and also alerted the media to get her description and the story out to the public. They were able to clear all family members of any suspicion pretty early on, so almost right away this was considered a stranger abduction, and the focus of the investigation was on the apartment and the surrounding neighborhoods. As for the apartment building itself, I saw many sources say that the police did knock on and enter all units in the apartment, which was 429 units, that was a lot of units, but apparently they searched them all and there were no signs that Nicole had been in any of them. The police also searched the garage of the apartment, sump pumps, storage units, utility rooms. They brought tracking dogs to the apartment. Helicopters and foot patrol canvassed the area around the apartment, and none of these efforts turned up anything. As I mentioned before, this was a huge investigation. The Toronto police ended up forming a 20-member task force that worked for 9 months on the case after the disappearance, and they interviewed and questioned over 6,000 individuals, many of which were registered sex offenders. It's estimated that these search efforts cost about $1.8 million, and the police also offered a $100,000 reward to the public for Nicole's safe return, but despite all of this, nothing ever turned up. Not even a person of interest was named to the public. Of course, they had people they were looking into, but all of them ended up being cleared by police, and there was no physical evidence found. No one saw anything, nothing. But in terms of leads, there are a couple things to note. It's never been confirmed if Nicole made it down to the lobby or not, but I think it's assumed that she didn't, considering Jen was waiting in the lobby for her for quite a while and didn't end up seeing her. So it is assumed that she was abducted somewhere between her apartment door and the lobby. And remember that Nicole and her mother lived on the penthouse floor, which is the top floor of the apartment building. So no floors in between her door and the lobby could be ruled out. And unfortunately, this was the 80s, so there were no security cameras. So we have no way to know if she even made it into the elevator. Another thing to note is that the police heard from a witness who apparently saw a blonde woman on Nicole's floor about 45 minutes before the abduction. Police released a sketch of this woman as they believe she might have been a witness to what had happened to Nicole, but nothing ever came up and the woman was never identified. Okay, so prepare yourselves for this because this is really scary. It's honestly terrifying. But 2 days after the disappearance, a woman and her daughter were at their barn feeding their horses. Their barn was up in a rural area near Barrie, Ontario, which is about an hour's drive from Etobicoke, just to give you an idea of where this is. But she and her daughter were feeding their horses in the barn, and they reportedly heard a little girl screaming from the woods, pleading for her life. The woman immediately thought of the missing girl from Toronto. Of course, this was big news, and a lot of people were on high alert. So she and her daughter immediately raced back to their house to call the police. The police came out, they did a thorough search of the woods and the surrounding areas, but they didn't find anything. I mean, that's terrifying. The woman and her daughter, they were just horrified, and it's a pretty strange coincidence. Like, it was only 2 days after Nicole had gone missing, and it's not that far from Etobicoke. It's just an hour's drive. So, I mean, it was never confirmed to be related, but it's a pretty strange coincidence. This is also pretty freaky, and I guess this isn't really a lead, and I don't think it went anywhere, but apparently after Nicole's disappearance, her mother was going through her things and found one of her notebooks, and inside the notebook was a little note written, and it said, "I'm going to disappear." So yeah, the sergeant on the case, who's been on the case since 2008, says that this doesn't really mean anything. Like, little kids write things all the time, and I guess the going theory is that maybe she was just watching Dateline with her mother and then wrote that down or something like that. But still, again, a really weird coincidence considering what happened to her. So that's basically it for leads that happened near the time of the disappearance. And days turned into weeks, weeks to months, months to years, and the case just dragged on and went unsolved for 40 years. This case really shook Toronto. I think it even shook the world at the time. I think even if you didn't live in Toronto and you were just a parent in the 80s, you would have heard about this case. It really left a lot of people on edge for years, and it even changed the way that people parented, and it makes you realize why this case is so famous and well known is because it just shows you that no place is safe, apparently. Like, not even the hall of your own apartment building is safe for your children. Okay, so let's move on to where the case stands today. As for ongoing efforts, the case is technically cold now. I mean, it's been 40 years, but the police are definitely still interested in the case. I feel like every couple of years, I see something in the news about how the police are investigating a new area or recanvassing the old crime scene and stuff like that. But we'll get to that in a second, but we'll go through things in the order that they happened. So in 2014, Crime Stoppers actually filmed a reenactment video of Nicole leaving her apartment door and heading down to the lobby. And the reason why they did this in 2014 was to use social media to re-spark interest in the case. And this video was actually filmed at the West Mall apartment. And apparently when Crime Stoppers went to film the video, there were some residents who remembered the case who have lived there since 1985. The police in 2014 also released an age-progressed photo of what Nicole would look like today. In fact, they continue to release age-progressed photos of her. And in 2014, the daughter of the woman who heard the screams in the woods in Barrie saw the age-progressed photo and the video, and it just brought everything back, and she ended up reporting the same thing to police again, and the police went and researched that area and didn't find anything. The sergeant who is on the case now says that they, to this day, still receive tips about Nicole Morin, and they try to investigate as many as they can. Apparently these tips are things like people remember someone who they knew who was acting suspicious around that time, or they knew someone who was living in the area. Okay, let's get into the most recent news about Nicole Morin. So just this past summer, July 2022, members of Please Bring Me Home, which is a Canada-wide volunteer organization dedicated to investigating missing persons in cold cases based on tips from the general public. This group searched an undisclosed park in Etobicoke close to the West Mall, and they brought cadaver dogs to the search, and apparently the dogs got a hit. The group's organizer basically explained that this means the dogs detected an odor of human remains. Apparently, this search was motivated by a tip from a witness who said she reported it in 2020 that she saw Nicole on the day that she went missing with a man that she knew in this park near the West Mall. The media doesn't elaborate on it more than that, unfortunately, but that's a pretty crazy tip. I don't know why they waited until 2020 to come forward with that, but hopefully we get answers on that soon. Also this past summer, the Toronto police searched an undisclosed park north of Toronto, and apparently in this search they took soil samples, and this was an attempt to locate Nicole's remains. And apparently this search was motivated by police trying to see if the recently solved disappearance and murder of Christine Jessup was related to Nicole Morin. I don't want to go too much into the Christine Jessup case because I do want to do a video on it, but I'll just briefly touch on it. Christine was a 9-year-old girl who went missing from Queensville, which is another area outside of Toronto, in 1984, so 1 year before Nicole went missing. Her body was found 6 months later in a field in Durham, and the case went unsolved for almost 40 years. Until 2020, the case was solved through genetic genealogy, and they were able to identify Calvin Hoover as Christine's murderer. And unfortunately, he never had to face justice for his crimes because he committed suicide back in 2015. I will definitely do a video on Christine Jessup, so stay tuned for that. The police haven't said why they think the cases might be related or how Calvin Hoover might be related to Nicole, but if you think about it, the circumstances of the two disappearances are pretty similar. They both went missing from the Greater Toronto area in a similar time frame, like 1984 versus 1985. So I can see why they might be related. But again, it's been 6 to 7 months and we haven't heard anything, but hopefully we get answers on that soon. The police are still hopeful, and they've stated this, that someone will come forward with more information as time goes on. Like, they're hoping that someone who was too afraid to come forward back then will do so now. As for where Nicole's parents are now, Jeanette continued to live in the West Mall apartment a year after Nicole's disappearance, which I can't even imagine that. You could have been in the elevator with your child's abductor. Like, I can't imagine what a nightmare that must have been. But she lived there for a year and then she moved up north. Art and Jeanette actually got back together after Nicole's disappearance, but ended up getting divorced again a short while later. I mean, I can't imagine the strain that a missing child could have on a relationship, so I feel like that's not surprising. And then, unfortunately, in 2007, Jeanette passed away from a heart attack. So she passed away without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. As for Art, after the disappearance, he quit his job as a truck driver to pursue searching for Nicole. He hired a PI, followed up on leads outside the country, and he sent posters of Nicole to every embassy around the world in case she was spotted outside of the country. But even with the PI and all the work he did to get her picture out there, nothing ever came up. Art has declined any public interviews since 2015 because it's just too painful for him to talk about anymore. But the Toronto police said that they are in constant communication with him, and the police and he have not lost hope that one day Nicole will be found, or we will discover what happened to her.
Nicole's mother died a few years ago, never finding out what happened to her daughter. But her father, Arthur, is still alive. He's aware of what police are doing today, but can no longer bring himself to do interviews. But a few years ago, he told City News he thought she was still alive.
What if she was, took off somewhere, she got married, and it was all arranged in her mind, that she was not supposed to connect? I just remain hopeful that whatever happened, that Nicole is okay and one day we will reconnect. Probably, if she's alive, she's got that hope too.
Okay, so now let's get into some theories on what happened to Nicole. So the first and most widely believed theory, and what I personally believe happened, is that Nicole was abducted by someone who lived in the West Mall apartment. Since her friend was waiting for her in the lobby, I think it's assumed that she didn't actually make it all the way down via the elevator to the lobby, so it just makes sense that it was either someone on her floor that abducted her, or she did make it into the elevator and then was lured off onto another floor and then was abducted. And as I mentioned before, because she lived on the penthouse unit, no floor in between the penthouse and the lobby could be ruled out. And you're probably thinking, but the police searched all the units in the building. How could she have been abducted by someone in the building? But you have to remember that the police were not notified until hours later after Nicole went missing. This, in theory, would have given the abductor lots of time to abduct her and then get her out of the building undetected, since no one was looking for her. Coupled with the fact that there were no security cameras in the building, it probably wouldn't have been as difficult as you might think. As for if this was premeditated or not, I mean, it could go either way. It does seem like she was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, but on the contrary, she did go to the pool a lot that summer. Maybe she met someone and they knew her schedule, or maybe when she went down to check the mail, she spoke to someone and told them that she would be at the pool. Who knows? I tend to lean towards the theory that it was just a crime of opportunity, and because she was not being searched for hours, it gave the abductor lots of time to just get her out of the apartment or even out of the city, which makes you think back to those screams that were heard in Barrie, which that just scares me to my core. Like, clearly someone was in trouble and that's still unsolved. So who was that? And I guess something that is still a question for me, it's how there were no witnesses. Like, how come anyone didn't hear anything? Like, I live in an apartment, and if someone was screaming in another unit, I definitely would hear them. But then I know that with older buildings, like buildings built pre-1980s, a lot of the times the walls were actually built of concrete, and that provides a lot more soundproofing. So I guess maybe you wouldn't have heard anything. And I guess it makes sense that nobody would have seen anything because people don't really hang out in the hallways of apartment buildings. Another theory, which I think has been debunked, but I just want to mention it just in case, But Art was suspicious of his church. He was part of a fundamentalist church at the time, and the church doesn't like divorce, so he was worried that Nicole might have been targeted because she was a child of divorced parents. But I think the police have debunked that because it was such a quick snatch, such a fast disappearance that doesn't really make sense. Another thing to keep in mind is that Nicole wrote, "I'm going to disappear" in her notebook. I think, like the sergeant said, it doesn't really mean anything, but it could be possible that she did meet someone at the apartment while she was going to the pool a lot that summer and she was being groomed, and maybe someone was talking to her about that kind of thing. But then again, there were a couple little girls who disappeared from Toronto in the 80s, and maybe she heard it on the news and that's why she wrote something like that. In terms of where she is now, she could sadly be buried and her body just hasn't been discovered yet. I feel like this could have been the easiest way for the abductor to get her out of the building, but then again, if she was being groomed, maybe she just willingly walked out of the building with the abductor. Maybe she was held in the abductor's unit for a little bit, and then by the time they actually left, Jen had already gone home and they were able to just walk out of the building. So I watched a press conference done by the Toronto Police in 2014 when the reenactment video came out. They said that they think it definitely is a possibility that she's still out there alive. And they even did an age-progressed photo of Nicole because they think this is a possibility. I mean, they don't have a body yet, and they say that there are many cases of missing children that are found decades later to be alive. I think the worst possible outcome of this would be that Nicole was brought into sex trafficking, but there isn't really anything or any evidence to suggest that, other than Etobicoke was kind of close to the Canada and US border. Anyway guys, that's all I have for today. If you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more true crime videos that I post. And if you're from Toronto, or if you've heard of this case before, please let me know in the comments below and share your thoughts and theories on what you think happened to Nicole. See you next time. Bye.